Okay, it is unfortunate if you watch the first two videos where we were working on the fore end and bringing this around, we unfortunately did not get the video of the back portion and how it came out, but it's essentially a repeat of the process that we did on the front part, although it's larger. We did have the complication of there are several cracks in this fore end that have been repaired, and getting the traces to cross those paths was a little bit difficult, but by moving the electrode, we were able to overcome that. So what we're left with is essentially what you see here. And if you'll remember, we talked about the staining, and you can see where some of the baking soda water solution has come down and brought out the tannins in the wood and kind of given it a green cast versus the nice reds and mahoganies that we had before. So this video is essentially on how we're going to try to bring that back to what we originally had color-wise, and to do so we're going to use wood bleach, and the wood bleach we're using in this case is Zinsser, and they have a two-part solution A and solution B. We'll start off with shaking this up a little bit. I don't know that it specifically says to shake it, but it seems to make sense if it's been sitting on a shelf. And we'll put some of this in rather than try to work out of the bottle, we'll just use these little mixing cups, and then hope it won't take very much of that. So I have two brushes so that I don't mix the bleach and the neutralizer. And what we're going to start doing is working on these areas where we can see where a difference is and soaking them with the bleach, so we can sort of monitor how the color is coming and if it's restoring back to the original color, and when to stop at the color we need, because we still have to match the wood from the stock end and that color. So this is going to be kind of a trial and error thing on my part. We don't want to recreate the same difference you can see there. We don't want to create that same difference everywhere, so we're going to try to blend this as best we can. So that we aren't seeing the distinction of where we allowed the baking soda solution come into contact with the wood and areas where we didn't. Doesn't really give any instructions on how long to leave this on. So it's kind of a watch it until it gets where you want it to be, which is a little more difficult in that we're changing the color because of the wetting action. So we're going to take it a little bit on faith that this product doesn't over bleach. I'd rather make 2 or 3 applications to get it right than to overdo it on one application. We're also a little compromised by the fact that this wood is not just one monolithic size and shape and thickness. There are a variety of different thicknesses of this wood. As you can see, where it's inletted, where the barrels go is thin, where the schnabel end comes in is thinner to the barrel, this being the thickest part of the wood here. It's very, very thin where it's been inletted there for the ejectors to go. So the wetting process is going to be possibly a challenge to get this back where we want it to go. You can see one of the repaired cracks there that did not discolor. So we'll kind of use that as one of our indicators of how we're doing. Let that set for a few minutes. Instructions call for 10 minutes for hardwoods. And so it also cautions to keep the area wet at all times. So we'll spend the next 10 minutes waiting and watching, keeping it wet, and we'll check back in when we're ready for the step B. All right, first thing you may notice is I've gloved up for this operation. In further reading, they caution to use gloves, especially during the second part, which is hydrogen peroxide. I assume that means it's not the level of hydrogen peroxide you typically put on wounds. The solution A we applied was sodium hydroxide, and so now we're going to use hydrogen peroxide to neutralize. The directions also say if you use this more than 2 times to neutralize the entire part with a vinegar solution, 2 parts water, 1 part vinegar. So we will now start the process of neutralizing. Notice the wood has been kept wet as per the instructions. I did have to recoat several areas a few times during the 10 minutes. This has had an effect. It's raised the grain in some places very significantly. We'll see how that goes when it dries overnight. This does have to dry overnight before any secondary applications are to be made. I'm going to excuse my arm while I turn this around to work the other end for you. And so we're wetting this completely down the first time. And I'm being pretty liberal with the application of this peroxide. And to my eye, you might want to go back and review. It looks to me like I can already visibly see a difference between where I had used the baking soda and water solution, and it was stained green and was darker as compared to what we have now. This is much lighter on the fore end. The schnabel tip is much lighter. Get a little bit of volume on there to rinse. And so they don't really state whether this is a rinsing operation or just a brush on and let it set operation and to let it dry. But from the looks of it, I'm going to say that we've gotten quite a bit of lightening, which should help the contrast of the black arc traces significantly. And I'm pretty happy with how it's working. Most of the other videos I've seen and people I've talked to use oxalic acid to do this phase. I did not find oxalic acid at my local paint store, and being rather impatient, I went with what they had in stock. So that is, it's actually, I can see it lightening as I rinse more and more of the part B. Over it. I want to make sure I get these tops, which will be very, very visible, and this front, which will be very, very visible when on the gun. This back section darkened up particularly dark, so I'm spending a bit more time on it than I have the front in terms of brushing it. And getting a little foaming action from the areas where the charcoal traces were. Of course, it is hydrogen peroxide. We're all used to that. We'll check the instructions one more time to make sure I haven't missed something here. It especially emphasizes do not mix B and A together. Now we're going to well, it says let it dry completely overnight. It does not say anything about drying it on the wood itself. So that's what one of my concerns is. This foaming in the arc traces is a little concerning. So I'm going to, in fact, we're getting some foaming now in some other areas where the product has been standing. So I'm going to break with what the rules and the directions say, and I'm going to pat this dry with paper towels. Let me dry my gloves, make sure they're dry first. And if needed, we'll have to make a second application, but that foaming, I'm not going to dry it completely out. I'm just going to remove all the excess from the surface of the wood. Okay, so I have a dry glove in this hand, so I'll pick it up with that. Pick up the towel with the wet hand. Make sure it's dried out there. Looks like we have. Gloves are dry. Try not to handle it by the outside surface. So that is a much different appearing when wet than it was pre bleaching. You can see the general pattern that I wanted was an oval coming up to here and then branching and coming up the sides on each side. So we were successful in steering the arcs where we wanted them to go pretty much. It took quite a long time. I've got about an hour of burning in this piece for what doesn't look like a whole lot, but there was quite a bit. There's quite a bit of detail that I'm sure is hard to see. We'll get some close-up pictures and add those so you can see the detail branching. So I'll put this down and we'll let it dry and we'll take a look at it overnight. Okay, didn't want to waste your time looking at me do just a regular staining operation, but you can see we went from the obvious yellow and very light compared to the Lichtenberg figures, dark areas, and got a little bit of the walnut tonality back. Some of the fiddleback came back, some of the grain came back. So I expect this to be a much more attractive piece now that we've gotten that done. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to go in and stipple the areas in between the traces or not. I plan to do that on the grip, which is what we'll be going to next. So there's some thinking I've got to do about that, and I'll try to get some closer detail shots of what this looks like. So there you can see a little better what the back, which we did not get videoed unfortunately, but what you did see in the front came out like that. We got some nice interplay here between the traces that were running back and then the traces that we ran from the back to the front to surround this center escutcheon. It goes there. So all in all, I'm fairly satisfied with how that's come out.